No, and that's when I puked from the costume. I was that scared. So,
I will
Yikes.
never do it again.
never
So what
again.
was your scariest Halloween costume?
Audra.
You asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scariest? I don't know that I go for scary costumes. And I
Hmm.
honestly have not dressed up for Halloween in years, so this is a change for me. But it's fun.
Audra, you're saying that like this isn't how you dress for every internal call now that you've gone full Western?
Yeah, this is the new look. This is the new
One
look.
log cabin, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
it's just up in the country. She's
Exactly.
proper country now. Welcome everyone to Coffee Talk with Serge. This is the spectacular edition. We have some costumes. At the end of this, we are going to ask people to vote. We have Audra going as Andy and or cowgirl.
No, I'm
Unclear.
a sheriff.
You're a sheriff.
Yep.
The law. Oh, okay. There we go.
Yep. The
You.
laws don't apply to me.
Lots of. That's a different episode. We'll go into feelings about that. Mick, what are you? Once again, I feel like this is just a normal Zoom call with you in those glasses.
this is just me in 1988. So, yeah,
88. Oh, I thought it was 86.
13-year-old Mick. Yeah.
Hmm, there you
So,
go.
yes, also, it's just Tuesday costuming. But
Just two.
happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween. There we go. I'm going as a ransomware, bad ransomware encryption. Ransomware idea here, courtesy of one of our co-hosts, occasional co-host, Kirsty Payne. So appreciate the last minute idea. We, as always, have a lovely show today. We're going to be changing up the format a little bit. We're going to be doing dropping deep dive today, trying to stay to about 30 minutes. And we're going to kick off with some news. So let's roll clip and get.
All right. So we have a story that's kind of a talker today. This is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed a complaint yesterday against SolarWinds, alleging that the company and its then VP of Security and Architecture, Tim Brown, defrauded investors and customers by failing to disclose poor cybersecurity practices in the lead up to the well-known SolarWinds hack, which was discovered in 2020. And so this complaint that you see here, it claims that SolarWinds' security statement, their public statement on security, was false and misleading in its claims about the company's password policy, its access controls, security development lifecycle for its software, and so on. And it also cites internal emails at the company, showing that the company was apparently aware of these security lapses, including a known vulnerability which allowed access to SolarWinds VPN, which was actually exploited in the SolarWinds supply chain attack for initial access. And so SolarWinds responded to this complaint with a statement. They're accusing the SEC of overreach. They said that they're concerned that this would actually hurt national security if in the future companies need to publicly disclose vulnerabilities before they have a chance to be addressed, accurately describing their security posture, including the negatives, right? That's what they're concerned about. So I'm definitely curious, Ryan and Mick, what you make of this, if you think it's a good thing, a bad thing. What do you think?
I think the idea of there being more regulations and the industry growing up is really good, personally. I think how this is being done is not the best. The CISO, the CISO. There's so many ways to pronounce that word. I guess it's not a word.
It's not
Actually.
CISO.
Yeah, CISO. They all like they kind of just get screwed by this. Like they don't have a lot of like his only recourse going through this. And I think people should be clear. Like the difference between the Uber, CISO and this are very different. Like that one, he very obviously committed a felony. Here it's kind of like, hey, you didn't do your job very well, and now you're being prosecuted.
So, wait, negligence doesn't line up with that? I get what you're going with, but like, I agree with something needs to happen. There needs to be a change, and it is like all cyber's all grown up now, which is awesome to see. Um, But at the same time, he's the InfoSec security officer. Exactly how much sway would he have to impede business operations completely until this is resolved? I just don't know. I think as a CISO, your power is still limited. Like, you've got that C title, but for the most part, I don't know what you really could have done. You would have really impacted the business, and I'm sure there's a lot of pressure.
I mean, what
Text
the
messaging,
SEC is specifically going after them is anti-fraud, and making materially false and misleading statements and omissions related to this company's cybersecurity practices, risks, and incidents. So
the text messages, if you are watching and you are fans of just reading through some legalese court documents, and you should be if you're going to work in threat intelligence, to be honest with you. But they are fantastic because the first thing you think of is, oh, wow, you're on a corporate network. And this is what you're, okay. Not the notes I would have taken, but do.
Yep.
it reminds me of in the government, when you would ask a really hard question about something in cyber and the person would immediately say, let me call you on my cell phone.
Yeah.
We don't want this FOIA. We don't want this discussed. We don't want this recorded.
Honestly, I feel like the outcome of this is not necessarily going to be other companies reassessing their security posture to make sure it aligns with their public statements. I really feel like the SEC is trying to make an example of SolarWinds, to try to, let other companies know that this won't be tolerated and there needs to be better transparency or better security posture. The problem, though, is that the response to this isn't going to be improvements in security. It's going to be improvements in legal language, right? You're just going to look at how vague can we be in our security statements about the fact that no company is unhackable, right? Every single company can be hacked. There's no such thing as,
Yeah.
I think the black hat floor may disagree with you. We'll find out.
Yeah, it's not. That's not realistic. And so, for a security disclosure to say our protocols and our procedures, everything is adequate to defend the company. The reality is the very advanced and persistent threats. If they want to get into your network, there's a good chance that they'll be able to. And so instead of initial access and compromise, I feel like the focus should instead be on detection and adequate and fast mitigation, right? Like with defense in depth and purple teaming, tabletop exercises, like focusing on your ability to respond, especially if you are a target of these types of attacks. Because the reality is, like, initial access, you could social engineer your way in. You could have a 0 day. You could have, there's so many ways to gain access to a network that, like, it's unrealistic to. But I guess the question here is the language, what's publicly shared with shareholders, as a shareholder.
Yeah. Well, and the key here, right? Like they're not, it's the SEC, so they're not charging him for any laws against cyber. It's against fraud or I'm looking at the indictment here. And it has things like the security statement on the website was misleading because it touted this company's supposedly strong cyber practices. For example,
a lot of glass houses.
Yeah, this is all boilerplate sort of stuff, right? Like, there's no way that any of this is different than what 90% of the other companies do.
Well, instead, I feel like the language is going to shift, where in these vulnerability or these risk statements, they're just going to say, we are working toward implementing a secure development lifecycle for our software. Because that's true, that SolarWinds was, according to their emails, working toward that. They just hadn't implemented it fully. And, with access controls, you could state that, we're investing this time and effort into improving access controls, right? Like, there are ways to get around in a statement to demonstrate that you are working toward better security, but where your security currently stands, how do you, analyze whether or not that's adequate?
I like the track you're taking here, though, Audra, in terms of like better laws. Like, this is, no one's security is going to get better, right? It's like, are we going to have actual laws around this? Does it start setting up precedents for that? That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, you can have really bad security as an organization, and you could be targeted by government-sponsored activity. And both of these things can be true in the case of SolarWinds. And I think their lack of security was just highlighted because of the SolarWinds breach. I don't think they're alone in that posture. I think for me, what it highlights is if you're a CISO out there, your role might shift in the next couple years, or you might view that differently, or you might view things like your compensation or your term differently, where you realize that if the hammer drops, I don't see any other claim in here against any other member of the board in their C-level in the organization, which the CISO can't be the only person left holding the bag.
Yeah, I think that's my big concern with this is that like going through this, there's a lot of discussion around like basically you lied to us in your filings, you lied on your website, which are the laws that they can prosecute them on right now, right? But like the CISO is not the only person to write those. Like they're not the ones writing the web copy for the website. They're not the one. Like if the CISO actually saw that, I would be shocked. It probably came from the chief marketing officer. Now they probably go back and say, yeah, we just took what the CISO said. But the realm that the CISO can actually influence some of this. I mean, what was his, or in this case his, like he could quit, I guess, which maybe is not a bad idea. Like if you like,
I mean,
putting me in a position where I can be liable.
I think that then that's the other line, right? If you are a CISO out there and there is a security line that you are unwilling to cross and have your name attached to, then you resign and hope that your resignation letter doesn't end up in the New York Times. I just, if that case that happens to someone.
Yeah, I do think that the reality is for CISOs, they need to have board approval for funding and prioritization of what they want to do. So it's not just on the CISO. I guess the problem is were the vulnerabilities acknowledged internally, and it looks like they were, and it seemed like they were a bit overwhelmed in terms of the number of vulnerabilities. And then also the interesting thing in this complaint is the response to the SolarWinds hack once the investigation began, once they started noticing victims. And there was one instance where there was a Slack message or something from a SolarWinds employee saying that they had lied about an incident being connected to their software, something like that.
Why would you write that down? Why would you?
Yeah.
That thing is something you say out loud,
So that's not good. That's definitely not a good reflection on, what this is trying to say. But overall, I don't agree with this as being an effective way to address security lapses at companies. Because I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there that are similar to SolarWinds in this way.
Maybe that's the impetus for everyone to raise the bar. Maybe that's the impetus for a lot of the funding to shift course in the next fiscal year and geared shift more towards security.
Well, I mean,
to the things like you said, it's that lateral movement inside. It's the detection engineering inside the environment. Access brokers make the first stage kind of moot now.
Yeah. And CISOs could bring this up when they speak to their board and say, look, we could face a lawsuit from the SEC if we're not, being transparent in our security publicly to shareholders. So we need to focus on this more. I mean, there is, that's a possibility that could happen.
So Mick, you've been digging more into the Form 8K work, for the team. One thing that's come up is, will this mean that people are more or less transparent with Form 8K? Because there's a lot of discussions in here within this document about the 8K document that SolarWinds released, and then it kind of being used against them later on. Do you feel that this is something that might change how organizations write that a little bit more open-ended in order to make sure they're not being slammed on the wall later on?
I think I know it's Halloween and we're used to candy and treats and sweet stuff, but here's a little spice. All right, it's not going to change anything at all. I think more the focus is going to be on what a material incident is, and that will get reported. That line's going to shift per incident because you don't really know what an incident that will shift your stock price happens until it really does. And that discovery in the reporting guidelines, I just think you'll see a lot more language. But I don't think you'll see the ball, the InfoSec ball move at all, really.
Yeah. Yep. I just shared the SEC press release on when they announced that about disclosing incidents when they're material and what that what material means, right? So anyway, so Robert is asking in the chat, how do you detect supply chain poisoning? How many businesses have actors lying dormant in their environments? And that's actually a good point, because with this VPN vulnerability that was exploited to get initial access to SolarWinds, that was confirmed to be how that compromise began, but it's unclear if maybe, the threat actor in this case had access to their networks beforehand, because that's something that, is not unheard of for adversaries to pre-position against networks in advance and then leverage that when they need to, right?
Yeah, we did some work on this. Actually, one of the very first Surge research projects was myself, Marcus LaFrera. We had a lot of consultation from Josh Cowling in the UK, who works at Splunk from a data science point of view. And we were looking at how do you deal with application servers in your network that start communicating outbound via SSL to new places or different things. And I talked to a lot of customers after SolarWinds, where they were like, how can we determine, A, if we were impacted? And the answer is always like, you have passive DNS. Like, are you able to see the north and south? Are you able to see the ingress and egress of the network traffic? But software supply chain, and that's an area that we try to be precise, because during COVID and when SolarWinds happened during COVID, there was a lot of discussion around if hackers disrupt the supply chain.
So many supply chains
All
out
the
there.
supply
Which
chain.
supply chain do you mean?
Oh, that would have been a really good costume too. Oh well. Next year I'll go as a supply chain. Just toilet paper everywhere. So software supply chain, we still haven't found a great way to deal with that, because you're trusting the vendor that they're not compromised, and short of questionnaires trying to find out if they have proper security, it's hard to tell. And you can look at SolarWinds, obviously, according to this document, a little bit of a dumpster fire. But our friends over at Microsoft, they are phenomenal. Like, they are very good at what they do. And they're also dealing with nation state attackers.
I'll push back on you a little bit on that. So on the other end of that, you have Log4Shell, right? The Log4j is this library that's out there. So, and so many pieces of software were built upon that. So I think that is the other problem. And the answer, we've talked about this, it's clearly SBOM, right? But then it's a lot more support for the open source libraries out there and the people that maintain them.
Well, for me, SBOM though helps with the mitigation afterwards, like the detection afterwards, but it doesn't help prevent, right? Like, you're able to see what was impacted, but if somebody did something earlier, you're not able to tell that difference just via an SBOM, just that you are actually impacted compared to, SolarWinds. Log4Shell, the advantage of having an SBOM there, and I am a complete SBOM boring fanatic on that one. It's just,
you should have dressed as Alan.
Oh God, Alan Friedman, that would have been great.
Well, it goes back to the point on responding quickly. I mean, that's really the key thing here. If there's a supply chain attack, how do you quickly identify if you use that component that's affected? Is it in your software, so that you can quickly mitigate and investigate, right? And so that's kind of where SBOM plays into that, I think. But it is tricky with the third-party risk and the vendor of your vendor and supply chain. Yeah. So, any other thoughts on this SEC lawsuit?
I am interested. It's something we've talked a lot. We just wrote this CISO report. Kirsty Payne and I, my co-author, Mick and I, have been doing report media with this, along with Kirsty. It's one of the primary author in reality. But we have talked a lot about the responsibility of CISOs, and we looked at their metrics and how they're talking at this board level. And this is the sort of thing I think that's really a difference from like 10 years ago, when I would talk to someone who's a CISO. Like, they were really focused on like antivirus metrics. Like, do we have our machines patched? Do we have, WSUS running? Are we compliant? Versus now, where it's like, you're dealing with much bigger fish here. This is like, can we make sure what we're saying stands up in a court of law with the SEC? That's a really big difference in my opinion. And this is like one of those I'll throw it out there, watershed events, right? Like, people are going to look at this as like, I think this is when things are going to change, whether for better or worse. I think it will be, in terms of how CISOs think about their careers and how they think about that role. It's fascinating.
It is. And Robert Flynn makes a good point in the chat that maybe corporations that have fudged on budgeting for a comprehensive SIM platform will finally see the logic in it now.
Thank you, Robert. Our sales team will be reaching out shortly, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah, I don't think this will be the last. I think it might shift a little bit. I think cool, cyber's all grown up. Now you're in court. But I know it's the SEC doing it. But shout out to the Southern District of New York, the Fighting Southern.
Yeah, they're busy.
Yeah. Busy gang over there. So keep at it, doing great work.
I will say the other good thing about this SEC report or this filing for our marketing team, they should be very happy that on page 6 they talk about resilience. So there we go.
It's the word of 2023, resilience.
As you guys know, our back ends are not that resilient. We should make them better. So there you go. Words to live by there.
Sounds like some CYA. Hey, cover your assets.
Unfortunately, that was Brown, not even SolarWinds member A and B, or InfoSec manager E, which I love, by the way. Maybe they're watching right now, but somebody is reading this and going, crap, I'm senior InfoSec manager Echo.
Wait, are we company A?
Wait, are we company A or B? I hope we're A.
Maybe that's a different will. It's US per one. Wonder who that is.
Yeah, and then you have things like network engineer. They don't even get a number, so they're not that important for the rest of it. It's the other people. Thank you, David Bianco. I will speak for my own back end. All right. Well, that's not the only thing that happened this week, is it, Audra?
No. So yesterday, President Joe Biden also issued an executive order on security and artificial intelligence. So managing risks with that. It actually requires AI developers to share red team test results with the US government. And so NIST is being tasked with setting standards for these pen tests of AI technology. And the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is going to apply these standards to critical infrastructure sectors. They're also going to establish an AI safety and security board. And the Commerce Department is also tasked with developing guidance to watermark AI generated content. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, questioning how that would look to help defend against fraud and deception so that you can detect when something is AI generated. The order touches on so many topics, right? It touches on healthcare, education, job displacement, discrimination, bias, privacy. It also mentions data brokers and the role that they play in selling data that's used to train AI algorithms. And it emphasizes the importance of workers' ability to bargain collectively when it comes to job displacement or the role of AI in the workplace, and then also ensuring they have access to training and development for upskilling, which I think is going to be a big thing moving forward. It also aims to protect against AI being used to engineer dangerous biological materials, which is very alarming when you think about that.
That's a fascinating one to me because I think we might have talked about it on the show earlier this year, like a year ago. But there's an NPR podcast talking about how a chemical company was looking to make better drugs, and somebody screwed up the AI. Basically, they weighted something a negative instead of a positive for their AI model, and it went from like how to heal someone to how to kill them very easily. And then they reported that to the White House, and then they were helicoptered to the White House the next day. They're like, how easy is this? They're like, oh man, someone had access to this model.
Yeah.
They'd just be able to make like untouchable ricin.
Yeah, it's very alarming when you think of the malicious ways that AI could be used, to do very bad things. But one positive thing that President Biden wants to use AI for is tools to find and fix vulnerabilities in critical software. There's also an effort for better collaboration with other nations. And one other thing that's mentioned in this is that the National Security Council and the White House Chief of Staff are going to work to develop a national security memorandum with further actions on AI and security. So that's sort of the next step in all of this. But yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, my main concern when I read through this is like, yeah, this is all well and good, but like, how fast will the government be able to keep up with the pace of this technology? That's really the thing, because deep fakes have been a problem for a long time, right? Since 2018, I think, 2016, 2018, something around then is when we started seeing deep fakes and sextortion schemes. We've talked about that. But there's no legislation really. There's not a lot of legal recourse that victims have in that area. And it's 2023, right? So there's
Yeah,
the
it's,
pace is,
I mean, the
is slow.
scale of this document, I think it was 111 pages, right? Like, it does feel like they just lumped every bit of AI together in a single thing, and like, we're going to get through this all in one document, which, if there's one thing I've been learning over the last year, especially once again from our colleague Kirsty, is around this idea of regulation and incentivization, right? Like, how much of this is going to turn into regulation, how much of this is going to like say, hey, let's make laws around this, let's implement that. But like the amount of items in this executive order is just gigantic. Like, just the topics alone, and it goes everywhere, like you said, from sextortion to biomedical stuff to talent shortage, to how to recruit people for that talent shortage, to governance. It's just crazy. Like, the scale of this is gigantic.
Yeah.
Mick, what are your thinkings here?
It's an executive order. Like it's heavy on vibes. So we'll see in a year. I would give it a year's time. Uh, all the things that you mentioned that it covers, and also does lay out some specific frameworks. We always talk about the executive order is great, and 12.333 still remains the greatest executive order of all time. Just so when you talk about executive orders, there's not much that comes out of it. So, but you look at this. So within 90 days, you're going to establish guidelines and best practices.
Yep.
Within like 6 months, like a chief AI officer in every department, and that is a completely new role that's going to be factored in the GS system. You think what a heavy lift that's going to be. So 9 months, the AI talent report that you mentioned. Within a year, there's going to be a national security memorandum. So now it's all vibes, and let's go forth and do a lot of work. So I think we can talk about this in a year's time, and we can look at the progress that they'll make. And Audra, to your point, will it keep up with technology? No, but it's better than not addressing it at all. The
Right.
IT Modernization Act was in what, 2017? So, modernization in 2017.
And Obama solved insider threat in what, 2015, 2016?
2015.
So
Yes, it's
we're
solved.
done. I was thinking about your comment earlier, Audra. Like, today I've used three different generative AI platforms, and I've used 2 software as a service tools on my phone that use generative AI, like have API call outs or utilize generative AI. And I'm just trying to think, like, that's been in a year. You know what I mean? Like, I was not doing that a year ago. Like, that's just in 12 months, I've gone from no generative AI to using this as part of, like, I took that SEC memo, I read through it. I was like, hey, I'm going to load this up into Claude. I'm going to have you pull this out, review this as if I was a cybersecurity professional, and tell me pertinent points. And like, hey, I've already read the document once, and now I'm reading it again, but now it's bulletizing and synthesizing. Like, hey, this is really useful for things like that. I created 2 images for some projects using generative AI, right? Like, this is moving so fast. It's getting into all these different places, and it's part of our lives. So, like, yeah, I'm glad we have this AI or this executive order. At least in the US, there's no way we're going to have regulation passed on something like this with the current political climate for anything, right? So
We'll see what happens in 16 days. So
Yeah, I think this at least establishes the urgency and the priority of this, which is good.
yes.
David asks in the chat about the feasibility of watermarking and provenance countermeasures in the executive order. Any thoughts on whether or not that will actually be effective? I mean, watermarking, I still think, with what we've seen just this month with misinformation and disinformation in, with the Israeli Hamas conflict on social media, just the amount of videos and information in the initial days of that were, proven to be false and not credible. I think that when you add in AI generated content to maybe push an agenda, that's even more concerning. And people may not even care to check for a watermark because they didn't even care to check the credibility of what we've seen this month. So I am really worried about that and how misinformation can spread online. We also had someone ask about solving insider threat, and that was just a joke. Insider
Yeah,
threat is
little
very
tongue in
much
cheek
still
there. Tongue
still a problem, but
in cheek.
yeah.
Yeah, the watermark one is interesting to me. I mean, there's a lot of smart people who obviously put into this executive order. So somebody writing that, I'm going to have to assume there is a background knowledge of the technology for the provenance countermeasures.
Isn't this the one that falls under Department of Commerce?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think makes sense. If you're looking at the organization that to respond to counterfeiting or to prevent counterfeiting or have those techniques or countermeasures in place or detection measures in place, it makes sense that it'd be commerce and a digital arm of that.
This is one of the first times I've ever, and my knowledge of blockchain is very low. But recently or earlier this summer, I was at a conference where they had a whole section on disinformation, and they were talking about how, basically items were being taken out of the media and modified for repurposing on Twitter or whatever else, and then changed. So, like, you have the legitimate photos from the Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, to, oh, this is actually now being modified and retweeted on Twitter, but it's still using the NBC logo. And their comment was like, this is actually a case where the transparency of blockchain is something that might be applicable for these images. Like, if we publish this image online here, then it has this blockchain accountability all the way through that you can verify. But then someone put it out like, yeah, that's a really fun way to think of it. But like, do you know how many times an image is created for like a website to be utilized with CDNs, with all this different? So they went into more of the technical side of it. But it does make me wonder if that's an actual use case for something that hasn't really found a problem yet. Anyway, I'd love for you to all invest in my new blockchain startup, disinfo.block.
You can't even encrypt right. You can.
Yeah, this is a good time to remind everyone that I came up with the term shadow AI. So
Shadow AI, yes.
Yeah, trademark that. Yeah. Well, I think we'll just have to wait and see how this all evolves. It's good to have an order out. So
There's definitely a direction to go.
yes, direction to go. Shall we move on to our upcoming events?
What do we have coming up?
Well, so we have a new episode of the Security Detail that's coming out tomorrow. And this is an interview with Dmitry Alperovich at the Silverado Policy Accelerator. It's a think tank. And Dmitry is actually the former CTO and co-founder of CrowdStrike. So he has extensive experience in cybersecurity and how it relates to geopolitics. So that was our conversation. We touched on misinformation, disinformation with current conflicts, the war in Ukraine, how the role of cyber in conflict and how that could potentially evolve. We talked about his role on the DHS Cyber Safety Review Board, their investigation of the Storm 0558 report, and then also just general prepositioning against critical infrastructure, the threat from China, Chinese threat actors, and then also a lot. We talked about a lot. He has a book coming out, so we talked about that. So that comes out tomorrow in case anyone's interested in listening. And I think it's episode 11. So we've had 11 episodes now, which is pretty cool.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, and then we also have a couple events in our next slide. We have Cyber WarCon, right, Mick? Or you'll be attending that next month?
I think Ryan will be in town as well.
Yep. I'm going to take some personal time off and attend that. It's a little personal adventure, so should be good. Always a great time. We're going to go sock shopping, I assume. It'll be good.
And I think we also have and Mick, you're going to be interviewing John Holtquist, right? Who organizes this event, and we'll have that as a coffee talk episode. I think probably that Tuesday before Cyber WarCon. We're hoping to hear from him about the conference and some other things. Yeah, so that'll be good. And then Gov Summit, December. It's crazy that tomorrow is November.
Remember.
Yep. And then I underlined June is .conf 24. So mark your calendars.
Mark your calendar. It's going to be a blowout event. Already excited by it.
Yep.
Roll out the pony.
And then sign up for our newsletter. If you haven't signed up, just go to splunk.com/surge. You can get alerts. We have a quarterly newsletter. and wombat facts. And with that,
most important part every year.
yes, wombats are very interesting creatures. I thought we were going to roll the video, so I didn't know if I'd be cut off. Let's go ahead and go into our charity challenge.
And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
Okay, so today is the last day of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so the challenge today is just to summarize the lessons learned from October 2023. What have you learned about cybersecurity this month? How are you more aware of cybersecurity? And our charity is the World Central Kitchen. This partners with organizations, local restaurants, emergency kitchens to serve meals to survivors of disasters. So they're also responding to Hurricane Otis in Mexico to help out there. And that's why we chose this as the charity for this month. So who wants to go first?
Mick is reigning champion. Your pick.
I think my reign has long been over, but long live the king. It's Halloween. Sure. So what have I learned? So in the past month, I have learned that we're still in the place we were about a year ago, a year before that. But I had a chance to go to some cool places and talk to some cool people. I went to a conference on defense, and there was a cat there that gave a talk on scattered spider, Alfie, Lapsus, Octopus, and what if I told you it was all the same gang? And it was amazing talk, and it was just, you should really look into it. But the point I'm making behind that is I had a video that I did for Splunk earlier in the month on Twitter. You can find it, or the platform formerly known as Twitter. Asked the question, are phishing tests still an effective way to test your cybersecurity? And if you answered yes, you really need to rethink that, especially if you're using some kind of identity verification system. I think that push tests are the new phish tests. And if your organization isn't implementing those, you really, really should, because that is going to be the problem for most organizations moving forward in 2024. Happy Halloween.
That was perfect timing.
That's perfect timing. I don't think you've
No
ever
pressure,
done that.
Ryan.
Ooh, all right, let's roll. See what happens.
Give me 1 second. It's loading.
The voice of God is loading the timer.
You have some extra time to prepare what you want to say.
I need it. That was really solid. I was wasn't expecting you to end with push test, or I thought you were going to go into a song like push it real good.
I had a rap in my head, but all I got was like phishing scam and AI program, and that's as far as I got. I couldn't think of anything else.
Well, watch out for your mom.
Spoken word slam. Bop, boop, beep.
So timer is not working, so whenever you start, I'll let you know when you have 10 seconds left.
Oh boy, this is going to go well. Okay.
Sure.
So the big thing that I've learned in the last month is that I really do not want to become a CISO or a CISO or a CISO, whatever it is. Reviewing the new world and just the complexities involved, I like to look at all different types of career options. And one of the biggest things that I've learned through this is that that level of executive officer right now is not covered by something called D&O. So Director and Officer Insurance, which I was not clear about at all. I had no clue what this was, but basically the concept is that a company will actually provide an insurance policy for officers of the company. So if they're sued, or they're basically sued, they're indemnified against a loss, and there's actually a policy set up for them. And almost every CISO I've now talked to and talked to their staff, none of them are covered by this. So these people are extremely exposed, and as we see today from the SEC, they are extremely at risk for being prosecuted or sued. And they are not being supported at companies. So that's what I learned.
Wow, Ryan. I would say that you win, because not only is that very timely and it relates to our SEC discussion, but I didn't know that and I just learned it.
There you go. Maybe we need to start changing Cybersecurity Awareness Month to be things that people are actually not aware of.
I knew that.
So
the saying is, if you're the only one without an insurance policy, you are the insurance policy.
Mick, did you have a D&O insurance when you were CISO for Major Pete? Or Mayor Pete? Pardon me?
Barely had a salary.
Fair enough. But, you got paid in vibes and New York Times resignation letters.
Best swag I've ever gotten from
swag.
anywhere. Campaign swag was the best. Shout out to Team Pete.
Wow. Splunk is hurt right now as you fly their flag. It's
Oh, no, I've got the shirts were just so soft. Like, they were soft from day one. It took us a while to get on brand with that.
Soft shirts are very important.
Mm-hmm.
very
And
important.
Splunk shirts now.
Apparently not for presidential campaigns. Cool. With that, we are ending early. Like we said, we're changing the format a little bit, trying to concentrate down. So no deep dive. There we go. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll be back next week. Who's our interview next week? Oh, actually, Voice of God has come in. If you have a costume that you prefer, please vote in the comments, and we'll vamp for a bit while those come in. Dan Christensen, David Bianco, Robert, looking at all you folks. Srev, let's see it. Let's see these votes.
Who has the best Halloween costume?
Best costume.
Malware. Yep.
So vote for
Ryan
me.
wins everything today.
Who is our next one-on-one, Audra?
I think it's going to be John Holtquist, right? Because right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I thought November was like a month away. No.
Yeah, next Tuesday is November 7th.
It is a month away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to have John Holtquist on next Tuesday to talk about Cyber WarCon and some other things, and so that'll be really good. Yeah, and definitely listen to the podcast. I learned a lot in that podcast interview as well. So
Dimitri's an interesting guy and a great choice in blue blazers, which is what he's actually most famous for. Little known fact.
I didn't know that.
So looks like we're evenly cut. The only two winners, but only one loser today, Mick. There we go. All right. Well, with that, I think we're gonna call this close. So thanks everyone for joining, and take us away, Daniela. Surge.